Hi everybody. So this is Can We Speak Plainly? It was a lunch and learn 15-minute bite size that we delivered in October to about 6 attendees. And it went down fine, I think. It's about autism and communication. And just everybody knows us, obviously, but just those who don't, or perhaps somebody new. I am a neurodiversity coach with the Thames Valley MOJ program. And Hayley.
I'm a returnee, and I'm not I'm on the IM product anymore, but neurodiversity coaching, virtual coaching.
Great. And so it's going to be mostly me presenting, although we've assembled this lunch and learn together, or this bite size together, and hopefully Hayley will just interject. And I'm going to try and make it as interactive as possible in this very short time that we've got. And hopefully there'll be a little bit of time at the end, but you can always put your questions in the chat as we go along, or just unmute and shout out. So what is autism? I'm very conscious that we are presenting to people who are very well versed in this. I'd still like to invite you just to put what your awareness of autism is, a sort of 1 to 10 in the chat. Just rate yourself in terms of your knowledge of autism. Yeah, so like 4 to 5 out of 10. So even though, 8 out of 10, okay. Brenda 6, Catherine 7, Catherine 5, Sarah 8. So all at the upper end, but there's always room for learning. I think that's what we're all here for. So thank you for that, everybody. So what is it? It's a brain difference, and neurodiversity meaning brain difference. You're born with it and you have it for the rest of your life. It's not an illness or a disease. Autistic people can have any level of intelligence. It has a medical name, autism spectrum condition, or ASC, but it's actually not a medical disease or condition. Now, this is a good one. What is communication? Anyone want to either shout out and communicate or put something in the chat? Any ideas? Big one, isn't it?
How about how you interact with the world?
Yeah, how you interact with the world. Transfer of information between 2 or more parties. Thank you. I think there was one other I missed, but hopefully I'll come back to that. So yeah, this is a tricky one. So communication, all of those things that you said completely, and it is verbal. I'm communicating now, but it's also non-verbal. It involves your tone of voice, gestures, body language, and as somebody says, it has to do with social interaction. So what do we know in terms of, autistic babies and children? There is a difference in communication early. There's almost universally a communication delay. There's not imitating others in pretend play, or this is delayed. Not sort of making the babbling sounds that babies make, and using words in their own way rather than to communicate meaning. So sort of interest in words. And then in children and adults, again, that sort of words that may not have a connection to the social context necessarily, or maybe the style of communication isn't necessarily adjusted to fit what everybody sees as a social context, or perhaps continuing to talk after the listener has lost interest, or just having difficulty in understanding taking turns. And so this source is from an interesting YouTube video, which people might like to see. But Communication and Autism by Dr. Rhea Paul from Yale University. And it's a really long one, but it's quite interesting. So I would recommend it. And thank you, Hayley, for finding it. And of course, it's not the same for everybody. So we all know that there's this thing called spectrum. And here's a lovely little cartoon of Archie. Again, I recommend this resource, but describing how spectrum is not actually linear. not just a little bit autistic or a lot autistic. But it's more like this rather beautiful looking sort of spectrum where, in some cases there may be no difference in the way somebody communicates, and in other ways they may be very different, and that's autism spectrum. And then, of course, there's this thing called spiky profile, which shows, you may actually have some extra special abilities in certain areas of executive function and communication and struggle with others. So that's neurodiversity, but it's also autism, of course, which is a neurodiverse condition. And then, of course, there's this thing called masking. And, masking is also a form of communication. And it's showing initially, well, a human need to fit in. People mask because they've suffered because of their differences, often. And those people that can mask generally will mask. And those for whom it's harder to mask will often just be not necessarily right at maybe might not even be employed, might be at the peripheries of life, which is a pretty significant thing. And so let's just go back. Has anybody got anything they want to add or say? I realise I'm not pausing much. Just let this sink in for a minute. Okay, so do interrupt if you'd like to at any point. Hilly, if you want to add anything, same. So what do we know about communication preferences? Obviously, again, this is not the same for everybody, but these have been identified. So a need for clarity and simplicity, so not enjoying ambiguity, sort of directness. Again, seeing meaning differently, so taking literal meanings of words or taking things literally where they might be meant figuratively. Deep subject matter expertise, so spending hours on favourite subjects, that sort of really deep focus and delving to the bottom of an interesting subject. Specific physical movements, so making sounds or movements when not masking. So one of the people I've been coaching says, when she gets excited, she wants to flap her hands around, and she doesn't because she's masking. But if she would let herself go, that's what she'd be doing. A sort of need for extra sleep often because masking is really tiring. And I'll put anything else. Again, please shout out. Probably missed something. So okay, that was for autism. So what about the rest of us then? That's an interesting one. So how we listen to each other is really important. There's a school of thought which actually I sometimes do subscribe to, which says just that nobody understands a word that anybody else is saying, which I find quite interesting. I don't know how we understand, but it's an interesting way of looking at things. But communication is cultural, or received styles of communication. I would say generally in the culture that we're in at the moment, probably people like a cool-headed, reasonable, kind of ideas-based way of communicating. Other cultures might like real passion in their communication or use more gestures. And then there might be other cultures which really like a transactional sort of communication style. So it isn't the same depending on, what you've grown up with. So just have a think, what's your preferred style of communication? What do you find acceptable? How do you deal with surprise, with the unexpected? Thank you, Reg, visual. That is another very strong form of communication as well, which we haven't covered a lot here, so thank you for that. I just want you to think a little bit about your limits. What's acceptable? What happens when your limits are stretched? How do you feel? Non-judgmental, that's an important style of communication for Fahima. Lovely to meet you. So just bring in that learning edge around communication styles. How do we cope with surprise? If we can bear it, what might we learn when we get taken to our learning edge? It's not an easy place to be. but there's a lot of reasons to learn. So if people with autism, if we could, reasons to understand how different communication styles work is really important. In terms of mental health, 70 to 80% of autistic children and adults have experienced mental health problems in their lifetime. So the way we understand the two different styles is really important. And also in the criminal justice system, obviously this is where we're working. So there was a University of Cambridge study which showed that actually autistic clients are not really very well provided with support. And that's really a lot of it to do with communication, understanding, and communication needs. I don't know, maybe there's some other reasons as well. But to understand each other, to learn about different styles of communication. Now I'm talking about autism, but I could be talking about, there's a lot of wars in the world, lots of different styles and ways that maybe could be helpful. So it's such an interesting subject. And so this is really the final slide. And I just wanted to offer it up, or we would like to offer it up to you as a question, perhaps to open it just to a few minutes of response or discussion. So this is from Daniel Tammet, who's a best-selling author who is autistic, who's done a really interesting book called 9 Lives on the Spectrum or something like that. And it's all famous people, actually, he's talking about, but they are interestingly masked and hidden, but different people with autism who are in the public eye. So he says here, autistic people offer a brisk corrective to groupthink. So I'd just like to open that up to comment, question. What does it mean? I don't know. Give it a go. What do you think? What is groupthink anyway?
General consensus, I guess. The very nature of an autistic individual engaging with somebody who is neurotypical, for want of a different phrase, it'll give you pause, for want of a better phrase.
I think that's really, really well put. Thank you, Reg, for that.
Maybe there's also something for being less bound by what is expected or what is perceived to be appropriate, maybe sometimes as well. So you're more likely to get an autistic person kind of say things that other people maybe won't come up with because they'll feel combined by sort of constrained by other people's expectations.
Yeah, personally, I completely agree with that. I think that's right, because there's the sort of less, the rules maybe don't apply in quite the same way. Yeah. And that's useful, I think, probably. I don't know. Anyone else have any comments? They like it or hate it or?
I think as well, like a lot of what we talk about in our workshops as well is that they have a very different perspective and are able to think outside of the box, which I think is like similar to other kind of neurodiverse conditions. So I think their ability to think outside the box would inherently mean that they don't necessarily subscribe to groupthink.
Exactly. And do you see that, Jess, as a useful thing?
Definitely. I think if it's harnessed in a positive way, it can be really, really useful. But then you get, like I'm thinking about one of my clients who's like extremely intelligent and really is like an outside of the box problem solver. But obviously that coupled with his trauma meant that he kind of went in a negative direction with it. He was burgling houses, he was committing thefts, but he was able to do those things because he's so good at thinking outside the box. But yeah, I think if it's harnessed, then it can be really positive.
I think that's such an important thing that you've just said. And that question of how it can be harnessed is a very interesting. Well, you might have an insight onto that as well, maybe.
I think having kind of knowledge of oneself and the way that your brain works can be really useful, and focusing on what somebody's strengths are as well. Because I think like with a lot of our clients, like the ones that have just come out of prison, they've had quite tough upbringings. So that together with their ADHD has kind of led to, you know, them committing these crimes. Um, but I think if they just had someone there to like listen to them and to help them realize what their strengths are and really kind of like focus on the positives of what they have to offer, that can kind of build their self-confidence and empower them to make better decisions.
Yeah, and I think you said something. I mean, we'll wrap this up now, but thank you, and thank you all for your conversation. But I think what you said also, Jess, you said sort of self-understanding, and I guess that goes beyond that the person with autism, I guess, to probably all of us, I guess, because then we understand our own edges and what we can bear. And so, yeah, I think that's a really good point. So yeah, that's the thought for the day. And what you want to take forward. Thank you very much. I think that's been about 15 minutes or so. So we will say thank you. I know it's been me talking a lot, but as I say, it's a joint effort. I'm the voice. We will stop now. Thank you.